9 true disturbing night shift security guard horror stories from Reddit. There is something about working alone at night that changes a person. Most people never have to find out what really happens in those empty buildings after everyone goes home. The hallways that felt perfectly normal at noon take on a completely different feel at 3 a.m. Shadows seem thicker. Every sound carries. Your own heartbeat becomes something you are suddenly very aware of. Security guards know this better than anyone. They walk those halls, they sit in those booths. They watch those cameras for hours and hours waiting for nothing until something finally shows up. These are 9 stories shared on Reddit by people who worked the night shift as security guards. Some of them quit after what happened. A couple of them are still not sure what they saw. All of them say the same thing, that after that one night, they were never able to look at an empty building the same way again. Get comfortable. Turn the lights on if you want. It probably will not help. Story 1. The Wet Footprints. Derek had been working mall security for about 2 years when it happened. It was a Wednesday night in January, slow season, bitter cold outside. The kind of night where the parking lot was completely empty by 9 and you could hear your own footsteps echoing off the tile floors all the way down the main corridor. He liked those nights, honestly. Less foot traffic, fewer problems, fewer teenagers to chase out of the food court. Just him, his radio, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. The mall he worked at was a big one, 3 floors, 2 anchor stores, maybe 140 shops total. After closing, the security team did a sweep in pairs and then split up to cover separate wings for the rest of the night. Derek usually got the east wing, the older half of the mall that had been partially renovated about 6 years ago. Half of it was modern and clean. The other half still had that late 90s feel. Darker lighting, older tile, a row of stores that had been sitting vacant for almost 3 years waiting on a lease deal that never seemed to close. He liked to do a full walk at midnight, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. That was his routine. The midnight walk was completely normal. He went through the east wing, checked the gate locks on every store, tested a few doors, shone his flashlight into the vacant units just to be sure. Nothing, dead quiet, except for the usual ambient hum of the building, the HVAC system, the distant buzz of signage, the creak of the structure settling in the cold. 2 a.m. was when things changed. He was about halfway down the vacant corridor when he noticed it. Footprints, wet ones, tracking across the dry tile floor, coming from the direction of the emergency exit at the far end of the hall and heading toward the center of the mall. He stopped and stared at them for a second. His first thought was that someone had propped the emergency door open, come in from the cold, tracked snow inside. It happened occasionally, usually homeless individuals looking for warmth. He got on the radio and let his partner on the west side know what he was seeing. His partner said he would make his way over. Derek followed the prints slowly, hand on his radio, flashlight sweeping the corridor ahead of him. The prints went about 40 feet and then just stopped. Not at a door, not at a store entrance, not at a bench or a kiosk. They just stopped in the middle of the open walkway, as if whoever had been making them had simply ceased to exist mid-step. Derek stood there for a moment looking at that last print. It was a full boot print, left foot, and there was no right footprint beside it, no indication that the person had turned around or backtracked. The prints leading back toward the emergency exit were still there, going in one direction only. He told himself it was a trick of the lighting. Maybe the person had dried off. Maybe there was a vent overhead that blew the remaining moisture off their shoes. He looked up. There was no vent. His partner arrived about 4 minutes later, and they checked the emergency exit together. The door was locked from the inside. No sign of tampering, no water near the door, no snow tracked in around the threshold. Nothing. The only moisture in the entire corridor were those footprints that ended in the middle of the hall. They wrote it up as an anomaly and finished the shift without incident. But Derek said the 4 a.m. walk was when it really got to him. He was doing his routine check of the vacant units, shining his light through the security gates into the empty stores when he got to the second-to-last unit on the row. He had passed this particular empty store probably 300 times. It was dark, it was empty, the floor was dusty. There was an old cardboard sign in the window from when the previous tenant had closed down. That night, when he shone his flashlight through the gate, he saw something in the back corner of the store. It was a person, standing completely still, facing the wall. Derek said his entire body went cold. He grabbed his radio, got his partner on the line, and told him to get to his location. He kept the flashlight on the figure, watching it. It did not move, did not react to the light, just stood there, face to the wall, still as a statue. His partner arrived in under 2 minutes. They both stood there looking at the figure. His partner started to call out, standard protocol, identifying themselves, telling the individual to turn around. No response. They called for the supervisor to come open the gate. The supervisor arrived with the keys and they slid the gate up and went inside. The store was empty. Not just empty of people, it was empty of everything, including the dust, because right where the figure had been standing, the floor had been completely wiped clean in a perfect circle about 3 feet across. Dusty everywhere else, clean right there. Derek requested a transfer to the West Wing the following week. He finished out his time at that mall, but he never did another 4 a.m. walk through the vacant corridor alone. He said the thing that bothered him most, more than the footprints, more than the figure, was what he found when he went to clock out that morning. Inside his locker, which had been locked all night, was a small piece of folded notebook paper. He unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, done in red crayon, of a figure standing in the corner of a room. He never found out who put it there.
Story 2. Aisle 7. Nolan worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of a mid-sized city in Ohio. The building was massive, one of those sprawling single-story structures that covers nearly the area of 3 football fields, filled wall to wall with industrial shelving units stacked 20 feet high, all loaded with inventory. During the day, the place had a full crew of pickers, loaders, supervisors, and forklift operators. At night, it was just Nolan, and on some nights, a second guard named Pete who covered the loading dock side of the building. Nolan's side was the interior, the shelf aisles, the dark ones. He had been there about 8 months when the incidents in aisle 7 started. It was not dramatic at first, just small things that pulled at the back of his mind. A pallet that seemed to be in a slightly different position than it had been an hour before. A box on the floor that he was almost certain he had seen up on the shelf when he passed through earlier. Things that had easy explanations. Forklifts were running all day, things got bumped, inventory shifted, normal stuff. But the cameras started acting up around that time too. Not all the cameras, just the 2 that covered aisle 7. The overnight supervisor for the camera room was a woman named Gloria who sat in a little glass booth near the main entrance. She told Nolan about it casually one morning as their shifts were overlapping. She said the aisle 7 cameras had been cutting out for 30 to 40 seconds at a time, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, and that the tech team had been out twice and could not figure out why. Nolan asked her what the cameras showed right before they cut out. She paused a little too long before she answered. She said they showed normal aisle footage, the shelf rows, the overhead lighting, nothing out of the ordinary. But then she added something almost under her breath. She said that right before each cutout, in the last few frames before the feed went black, there was something at the very far end of the aisle. She described it as a shape, tall, just standing there at the end of the row. She said she assumed it was a worker who had stayed late or a shadow from the shelving catching the light wrong. She filed it with the tech report and moved on. Nolan started paying more attention to aisle 7 after that. He began keeping a log of the times he walked through it and what he observed. Most nights, nothing, but on 3 separate occasions over the following 2 weeks, he found signs that someone had been in that aisle. The first time, it was a partial boot print in a thin layer of dust along the base of a shelf, too large to be his, pointing in the wrong direction.
The second time, it was a small collection of empty food wrappers pushed neatly behind a pallet near the back wall, granola bar wrappers, the kind you could buy at any gas station. The third time, it was worse. The third time, it was a voice. He was at the far end of aisle 7 near the back emergency exit when he heard it, a man's voice, low and calm, coming from somewhere in the middle of the aisle. It was not words exactly, or if it was, he could not make them out. It sounded like someone talking quietly to themselves. He called out, identified himself. The voice stopped immediately. He swept the entire aisle, both sides. He checked the shelf levels with his flashlight, peering up into the stacked inventory. He checked the floor. Nothing. The aisle was empty. He got on the radio with Pete and told him what happened. Pete came over and they walked the aisle together this time. Still nothing. They reported it to management the next morning. A full search of the warehouse was conducted that afternoon before the day crew clocked in. Security found a concealed space behind a double-stacked wall of pallets near the middle of aisle 7, a gap about 4 feet wide and 8 feet deep that you wouldn't notice unless you were specifically looking for it. Inside the gap, they found a sleeping bag rolled up, a backpack, several days' worth of food wrappers, a battery-powered lantern, and a spiral notebook. The pages of the notebook were filled with handwriting, dates, times, observations. Whoever had been living back there had been watching the warehouse. They had logged the security patrol schedules, the camera positions, the shift changes. They'd been living in that aisle for what management estimated was at least 3 weeks. The space was empty when they found it. No sign of where the person had gone. Management installed new cameras and increased patrol frequency. They never identified who it was or how they had gotten in and out of a building that was kept locked and alarmed every night. Nolan quit 2 weeks later. He said it wasn't the fear of whoever it was coming back. It was the notebook. Specifically, it was the last entry, which was dated the morning of the day they found the hiding spot. It just said one thing. It said, "They know."
Story 3. The Patient in the Basement. Vince worked hospital security at a large regional medical center for 4 years. He wants to clarify up front that hospitals at night are always a little unsettling. That is just the nature of the environment. You have the sounds of machines, the occasional alarm, staff moving quietly through corridors, the awareness that somewhere in this building people are very sick or in pain. It is not like working a mall or an office building. There is a weight to it. But even accounting for all of that, what happened during the 3rd year of his time there was something else entirely. It started with the access logs. The medical center had electronic key card access on every restricted area: stairwells, the pharmacy, the surgical floors, the basement level where storage, mechanical rooms, and the morgue were located. Each swipe was logged with a timestamp and a card ID. Routine stuff. Security reviewed logs when there was a reason to, and otherwise they just lived in the system. A facilities manager named Ron flagged something to Vince's supervisor in early spring. He said the basement stairwell access door on the east side of the building had been registering an unusual number of entries during the overnight hours. Entries that did not match any of the staff schedules. Not the cleaning crew's hours, not the morgue transport team's hours. The entries were coming in between 3 and 5 in the morning, consistently 3 to 4 nights a week. The card ID logging the entries came back as belonging to a patient wristband scanner, a handheld device used on one of the inpatient units upstairs. The device had been reported missing 6 weeks earlier and never turned up. Vince started spending time in the east stairwell basement area during the 3 to 5 window. For the first week, nothing. He would position himself near the door and just wait. The door never opened. Then, one night, he was not watching the stairwell. He was doing a sweep of the ground floor corridor when he saw him. A man in a patient gown standing at the end of a hallway near the pharmacy corridor. Just standing there, facing away from Vince, completely still. Vince called out the standard identification, announced himself as security, asked the individual if they needed assistance. The figure turned its head slightly, not fully, just enough to show it was aware of being addressed, and then walked around the corner. Vince followed immediately.
When he came around the corner, the corridor was empty. He searched that entire wing for 45 minutes. No patient. He checked with the nursing stations on every floor, described the individual, tall, thin, older patient gown, no visible ID band on the wrist. Nobody had a missing patient. Nobody had a patient matching that description anywhere in the building. He saw the figure 4 more times over the next 3 months. Always at night, always in a patient gown, always somewhere it should not be. A maintenance corridor, the back hallway near the service elevator, the loading dock. Always just standing, always turning slightly when addressed, always gone by the time Vince got within 20 feet. He started calling him the Wanderer in his own head. The thing that resolved it, and the thing that haunts him most, happened on a Tuesday in late June. A plumbing issue in the basement required facilities to open a utility room that had not been accessed in over a year. It was a large mechanical space off the main basement corridor, full of old HVAC equipment and conduit runs, not used for anything active. When Ron and his crew opened it that Tuesday afternoon, they called security immediately. Someone had been living in that room. Not recently, the evidence suggested months of occupation, possibly longer. There was a mattress on the floor, worn down and flattened with use. Candles burned down to their bases, wax pooled on the concrete. Several changes of clothing, including 3 folded hospital gowns. Food packaging that went back at least 6 months based on the expiration dates. An overturned crate being used as a table with a small mirror propped against the wall. There was no active way in or out of the room that they could identify. The only door was the one facilities had just unlocked. Vince walked the entire room himself, checked every wall, every piece of equipment, looking for a secondary passage. He found none. Whoever had been in that room had not used the door to leave, because the door had been locked from the outside, from a lock that had not been opened in over a year. The hospital brought in investigators. They identified the clothing, but were never able to identify who the person was or how they had accessed the space. Vince never saw the figure in the patient gown again after that room was found. He thinks about the mirror sometimes, about whether that person was watching themselves in it or watching something behind them.
Story 4, Extension 2206. Priya had only been working at the building for about 6 weeks when the phone call started. She was a night security officer at a 34-story office complex downtown, one of those glass tower buildings full of law firms, financial companies, and corporate suites. During business hours, the place had maybe 2,000 people in it. After 7 p.m., it was her, one other guard named Curtis who covered the lobby and loading dock, and a cleaning crew that finished their run and was out by midnight. After midnight, it was just her and Curtis. The building had an internal phone system, the old kind, where every office and suite had a desk phone hardwired into a building-wide PBX. Most of the companies had their own phone systems layered on top of it, but the building infrastructure was still there underneath. Priya had a phone at the security desk in the lobby, and it showed extension numbers when incoming calls came through. The first call came on a Thursday night, just after 1 in the morning. Her lobby phone rang with an internal extension. The display read 2206. She answered. Nothing, just a faint sound, almost like air moving through a space, and then the line went dead. She assumed it was a misconnect, maybe an alarm in one of the suites triggering something in the old phone infrastructure. She noted it in the log and moved on. It happened again the following Monday, same extension, same time, just after 1 a.m. This time she stayed on the line for almost a full minute, listening. The sound was still there. She described it as breathing, but not quite right. Too slow, too even, like a recording of breathing rather than a real person. Then the line went dead again. She mentioned it to Curtis during their check-in. He looked up extension 2206 in the building directory. Floor 22, Suite 2206, a commercial real estate firm. He said he would check with building management about whether the firm had any late-staying employees.
Building management came back the next day with something that made Priya's stomach drop. Suite 2206 was currently under full renovation. The suite had been vacant for 4 months. More importantly, the renovation had involved a complete communications infrastructure overhaul. All the old phone lines in that suite had been physically cut and removed. There were no active phone connections in Suite 2206. The renovation crew had confirmed this the previous week. Priya brought this Mac to Curtis. They agreed she would check it out. She took the elevator to floor 22 on a Friday night around 1:15 a.m. The hallway was dark. The renovation crew had pulled the overhead lighting as part of the build-out, so only the emergency exit lights were on, casting everything in a low red glow. The air smelled like fresh drywall and sawdust. She could hear the distant hum of the building around her. Suite 2206 was at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked, standard during active renovations. She pushed it open and swept her flashlight around inside. The suite was a shell. No walls between offices, just the open floor plan with framing studs, plastic sheeting, bare concrete floors. No furniture, no equipment, just raw construction space. And on the floor, in the middle of the suite, was a phone. It was an old desk phone, the kind that must have been 15 or 20 years old, gray plastic, the coil cord hanging loose. It was sitting on the bare concrete floor, and the cord was not connected to anything. Both ends, the wall jack and the handset cord, were just dangling free. She stared at it for a long moment. Then it rang. She said later that she stood there for 3 full rings before she reacted. The sound was completely absurd. A physical phone, no connections, no power source, ringing in a gutted office suite at 1 in the morning. She finally reached out and picked up the handset. The breathing was there again, that slow, even, wrong breathing. She said she tried to speak, managed to get out a single hello, and then the breathing stopped and the line went entirely silent. Not even a dial tone, just silence. She set the handset down, walked back to the elevator, rode it to the lobby, sat down at the security desk, and did not move again until Curtis came to check on her 20 minutes later. The phone was removed by the renovation crew the following Monday. The foreman said he had no idea where it came from. It was not part of their equipment and should not have been in the suite. Priya transferred to a daytime position 2 months later. She still thinks about those calls. Specifically, she wonders who or what was on the other end.
Story 5. The Silver Sedan. Colt took the night security job at the downtown parking structure mostly because the pay was decent and the hours were quiet. He had worked customer-facing jobs for most of his 20s and was tired of dealing with people. A parking garage at night seemed like the perfect antidote. 6 floors, 800 spaces, mostly empty after 10 p.m. He patrolled the levels on foot every 2 hours and spent the rest of the time in the booth at the entrance, watching the cameras. The silver sedan appeared on a Tuesday. He noticed it during his patrol. Level B, spot 4, a silver 4-door midsize, no front plate. He could not make out the rear plate from his angle and made a note to check it properly on the next round. He had not seen it come in during his shift, which started at 10. Either it had come in before he started or he had missed it on the camera. Both were possible. The next morning when the day guard came in, Colt mentioned the car. Day guard said he would keep an eye on it. When Colt came back for his shift that evening, the car was still there. Second night, same spot, same car. No one had touched it. He walked up to it this time and checked the rear plate. There was no rear plate either, just the mounting holes. He looked inside through the window. Empty. Nothing on the seats, nothing on the dash, nothing in the back. Clean interior, clean glass. The car looked almost new. He ran the vehicle description up to his supervisor, who said they would contact the towing company if it was still there after 72 hours. Third night. Still there. Colt was doing his 2 a.m. patrol on level B when he noticed something different about the car. The exhaust pipe. There was a faint shimmer of heat coming off it, barely visible, but he was close enough and the garage was cold enough that he caught it.
The engine was running. He stood there for a moment, hand on his radio, watching the car. The interior looked exactly the same as before. No one visible in any seat, no glow of a phone or any interior light, just a running car sitting in a parking spot, completely dark inside. He called it in to his supervisor, was told to approach with caution and to wait for backup before engaging. His backup was another guard named Theo who covered the adjacent building and could be there in 10 minutes. Colt stood about 15 feet from the car and watched it. The exhaust was still shimmering. There was no condensation on the windows. Inside and outside temperature must have been equalized, which meant either the car had been running for a very long time or the heater was on. Theo arrived. They approached the car together, one on each side. Colt shone his flashlight through the driver's side window. Empty. Completely empty. All 4 seats, the floor, the back seat, the rear window ledge. Nothing. No one. But the engine was definitely running. They could feel the heat from the hood, hear the faint idle vibration. Colt tried the driver's door. Locked. They called the police. A patrol unit arrived about 20 minutes later. The officers ran the VIN through the window. The VIN plate on the dash showed a number, but when they ran it through the system, it came back as belonging to a completely different vehicle, a pickup truck that had been totaled in another state 3 years prior. One of the officers tried to Slim Jim the lock so they could reach in and kill the engine. Before he could get the door open, the engine stopped on its own, just cut off like someone had turned a key. They got the door open, fully empty interior, cold engine, not running cold, not just turned off cold, stone cold, like the car had been sitting parked and off for hours. On the dashboard, weighed down by a single quarter, was a folded piece of paper. The officer unfolded it. He turned and looked at Colt with an expression Colt said he will never forget. The note had 3 words on it, just 3 words, Colt's first name written at the top in handwriting he did not recognize, and beneath his name in the same handwriting, I see you. The silver sedan was towed and processed. No fingerprints inside, no DNA, no usable evidence of any kind. The case was listed as a vehicle abandonment with a mismatched VIN and filed away. Colt started parking his own car in a different spot every night. He still checks his rearview mirror more than he used to.
Story 6. The Exhibit That Moved. Tamara had landed what she initially considered one of the cooler night security gigs available. Overnight guard at a natural history and Civil War museum in a medium-sized southern city. The museum was beautiful. 3 floors, thick stone walls, soaring ceilings, glass display cases full of artifacts going back hundreds of years. She liked being around old things. She liked the quiet. She figured it would be peaceful. She was right for the first 2 months. The Civil War exhibit occupied most of the 2nd floor. It was an immersive space, low mood lighting, period music piped in softly through hidden speakers during museum hours, and at its center, a large diorama featuring 8 life-size mannequins dressed in period-accurate uniforms and civilian clothing, posed in a realistic scene depicting a field hospital from around 1863. Soldiers in various states of injury, a doctor figure, a woman in period dress. Tamara did not like that exhibit at night. She could not explain it exactly. It was the mannequins, obviously. Mannequins at night are uncomfortable for everyone. She would be the first to admit that. But it was something beyond the standard unease. It was the feeling, each time she walked through, that the poses were slightly different from the last time. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she was not paying close enough attention during her first few passes and was now second-guessing herself. Then, the motion sensors started going off. The Civil War room had 4 motion sensors, 2 near the entrance, 1 over the main diorama, 1 near the back display cases. They were linked to an alert system that paged her tablet when triggered. For the first 2 months, they never went off during her shift. Then, in the 3rd month, the one over the main diorama started pinging, reliably between 2 and 3 a.m.
Every time she went up to check, the room was empty. Every time the mannequins looked, she thought, slightly different. The field doctor figure seemed to be facing a few degrees more toward the entrance than before. The woman in the period dress seemed to have her chin slightly more tilted. Nothing she could prove. Nothing she could point to definitively and say, that changed. She started taking photos. Every time she entered the room, she photographed all 8 mannequins from the same angle. She built up a reference library on her phone over the course of a few weeks, time-stamped, same position in the doorway each shot. When she compared them side by side, there were differences. Not large, dramatic differences, not the kind of thing that would look obvious to anyone else, but the kind of thing that when you lay the photos next to each other in sequence showed a clear and undeniable progression. The field doctor figure had moved. Over the course of 3 weeks, across maybe 11 documented photographs, the figure had rotated approximately 25 degrees. The woman in the dress had shifted her weight. She was a rigid mannequin. She should not have had weight to shift, but something about the angle of the hips had changed. Tamara took her photo documentation to the head of operations, a man named Gerald who had been with the museum for 20 years. Gerald was skeptical. He suggested the cleaning staff might be accidentally nudging them during their weekly wipe-down of the display area. He suggested the motion sensors might be going off from HVAC airflow. He was very reasonable and very unhelpful. She kept documenting. The night it ended her time at the museum was a Saturday in March. She did her 2 a.m. round of the second floor and took her reference photo of the Civil War exhibit. 8 mannequins, same poses as the previous night. She continued her patrol, went back downstairs, spent an hour at the security desk, and then went back up for her 4 a.m. round. She stepped into the Civil War room and swept her flashlight across the diorama. 7 mannequins. The field doctor figure was no longer in the diorama. She stood in the entrance of that room for what she said felt like a very long time, but was probably only about 10 seconds. Then she turned and looked at the security camera mounted in the far corner of the room, the camera that recorded everything and fed back to the security desk downstairs. The field doctor mannequin was standing directly beneath the camera, face up, looking directly into the lens. She called the police. She called her supervisor. She did not go back into that room. The mannequin was found, after an extensive search, back in its position in the diorama by the morning staff arrived. Security footage from the camera covering the Civil War room from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. showed nothing, complete static. The camera had malfunctioned during the exact window in question. Tamara turned in her notice the next morning.
Story 7. What's in the pit? Brett took the construction site security job as a temp position while he was waiting on something better to come through. It was supposed to be 3 months. Just watch an empty lot, log arrivals and departures during the day crew, and then sit in a trailer booth from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., making sure nobody walked off with equipment or copper wire. Boring. Fine. He needed the money. The site was a future mixed-use development on the edge of downtown, a big pour of underground parking garage and residential units, currently in the early foundation phase. Most of the lot was open dirt and machinery. At the center was the pit. About 30 feet deep, maybe 100 feet across, the raw beginning of what would eventually be an underground structure. It was surrounded by chain-link fencing with warning signage and a few work lights mounted on poles around the perimeter. At night, with the site lights on, the pit was visible from the guard trailer, a dark square hole in the ground with harsh white light ringing the edges. Brett started hearing the voices about 2 weeks into the job. Children's voices, coming from the direction of the pit. The first time, he convinced himself it was a radio left on somewhere. The second time, he went to check and found nothing. The pit was empty, the perimeter fence was locked, there was no radio, no one around. The voices, laughing, just children laughing, had stopped by the time he reached the fence.
He mentioned it to the day crew foreman, a heavy-set man named Bill. Bill looked at him for a moment and then said something that stuck with Brett. He said the property they were building on had been a city park in the 1940s and 1950s, and before that it had been something else, something older, that he did not want to get into. He told Brett to just ignore any sounds from the pit. Brett tried, but the sounds continued, 2 or 3 nights a week, always between midnight and 3 a.m. Sometimes laughter, sometimes what sounded like a single child calling out for something, not words he could make out, just tone and cadence, a child calling in the way children call when they want something. Sometimes silence, but a kind of heavy silence, like the silence right after a sound stops. Then the toys started appearing. The first one he found on a Monday morning, tucked against the base of the chain-link fence on the pit's north side. A small rubber ball, faded yellow, the kind you could buy out of a grocery store bin for $1. He tossed it in the equipment trailer's trash, did not think much of it. 2 nights later, a stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear with button eyes, sitting upright against the fence. He photographed it and reported it to his supervisor, who said kids must be getting on site somehow and to increase his perimeter checks. Then a plastic toy truck, then a child's shoe, just one, a small sneaker, tied to the fence with its own lace. He was doing this carefully now, photographing everything in place before touching it, logging the time and location. His supervisor had stopped responding to his reports with any urgency. He was starting to feel like he was the only one taking this seriously. The last item appeared on a Thursday night. He found it during his 3 a.m. perimeter walk, a stuffed rabbit, white with one ear torn half off, sitting at the fence line just like the others. He photographed it, reached down to pick it up, and noticed something tucked into the tear in the ear. A folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a photograph, a printed photo, slightly faded like it had been out in the weather for a while. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. It was his guard trailer, his chair visible through the window, the site lights in the background. The photograph was taken from outside the fence, at night, looking toward the trailer. Specifically, it showed his trailer at exactly the angle you would have if you were standing at the pit fence on the north side of the site, the exact spot where all the toys had been left. He was in the photograph, sitting in his chair inside the trailer, visible through the window, with the light on. The timestamp printed on the photo margin showed a date and time from 3 weeks before Brett had started the job. He called his supervisor from the site, voice shaking, and refused to remain on location without a second guard present. The company sent someone out within an hour. Both of them searched the perimeter and found nothing. Construction was halted briefly the following week when workers excavating the deeper foundation levels reported finding what appeared to be very old structural debris, brickwork, foundation stones, personal objects, none of it matching the site's documented history. Brett left the job that week. He did not take any security work for almost a year after that. He still has the photograph. He has never been able to explain the date on it.
Story 8. The Yearbook. Owen had worked the overnight security shift at the university library for almost 3 years. It was a good job for someone who liked reading and did not mind silence. The library was a big one, 5 floors, hundreds of thousands of volumes, a basement archive, and a 24-hour study room on the ground floor that stayed open but was monitored by desk staff. His job was to make sure only authorized people were in the restricted sections after hours, and to patrol the floors every 90 minutes. He had seen plenty of students sneak up to the closed floors to study or sleep or whatever. He'd run people out of the stacks more times than he could count. None of that bothered him. What started bothering him in the fall of his third year was the automated book return system. The building had a book drop station on the ground floor where people could return materials after hours. A slot in the wall, books went into a bin, the system logged each return with an RFID scan. Simple enough. The log showed entries with timestamps, and Owen would check it as part of his routine. Starting in October of that year, the system began logging returns between 2 and 4 in the morning, hours after the drop station was last used by actual patrons. Not every night, but 3 or 4 times a week. Owen checked the physical bin each time an alert came through. It was always empty. The log showed a return, but there was nothing in the bin. He brought it to the library's IT coordinator, who ran diagnostics and found nothing wrong with the system. She said it might be ghost reads, RFID interference from nearby materials causing false positive scans. She noted it for monitoring and moved on. Owen kept checking, and one night in November, he found something. When he went to check the book drop bin after a logged return, the bin was empty, but a book was sitting on the ledge beside the station, not in the bin, on the ledge next to it, placed neatly face up. He picked it up and looked at the cover. It was a university yearbook, 1987. He flipped through it briefly, brought it to the ground floor desk, and set it aside to turn in to the circulation staff in the morning. Old yearbooks sometimes circulated as reference materials. It was back the next night. Same ledge, same placement, same yearbook. He shelved it himself this time, walked it upstairs to the floor where the yearbook collection was kept, and put it back in its proper spot on the shelf. Third night, back on the ledge. He started paying attention to what was inside it. He sat at the desk during a quiet stretch of the night and flipped through it slowly. About halfway through, he noticed a page with a student photo circled in red pen, one of the underclassmen portraits, a thin young man with a serious expression. The name beneath the photo read G. Aldrin. Something made him look him up. He was not sure why, he just had a pull toward it, a feeling. He used the library's archive terminal to search the university's historical student records, which were partially digitized. He searched the name, Gordon Aldrin, enrolled fall 1985, disappeared from campus in March 1989, listed as a missing person, case never resolved. Owen sat with that for a moment. Then he went to the camera system and pulled up footage from the floors above, the floors he'd been patrolling all fall. He went back through weeks of overnight footage, not sure what he was looking for. On the footage from a night in early October, he found it. Third floor, history section, 2:47 a.m. A figure visible at the end of a long row of shelves, standing still. The image quality was not great, old cameras, low light, but the figure was there. Tall, thin, facing toward the camera. He searched other nights, found the figure on footage from 6 separate occasions, always the same floor, always the same section of shelves, always between 2 and 4 a.m. He'd patrolled that floor on all of those nights and had never seen anyone. He printed a still frame from the clearest piece of footage and took it back to the 1987 yearbook. He held the printed frame next to the circled photo of Gordon Aldrin. He put the yearbook down and did not pick it up again. He requested a reassignment to day shifts the following week, citing personal reasons. His supervisor granted it without question. The yearbook was not on the ledge again after that. Owen sometimes thinks about whether it had been waiting for someone to find it, to find him, and whether, now that someone had, Gordon Aldrin had finally gotten what he came there for.
Story 9. The Tenant in 4C. Lucia had been the overnight security coordinator at the Pembroke residential complex for about 18 months. It was a mid-rise apartment building, 12 floors, 240 units, mostly long-term tenants. Her job was less active patrolling and more monitoring, watching the camera feeds, responding to resident calls, logging incidents, occasionally walking the common areas and stairwells when something needed checking. It started with complaints. 3 separate residents on different floors reported the same thing within a 2-week window in the spring: a man in the stairwells.
always described the same way: tall, older, wearing dark clothing, standing very still. 2 of the residents said they had made eye contact with him and that he had not reacted, had not spoken, had just watched them go past. One resident, a young woman named Kelly on the 7th floor, said she had seen him twice in the same stairwell landing on different nights. Lucia reviewed all the stairwell camera footage for those dates and times. Nothing. She watched every minute of footage from every reported incident window and saw no one matching the description. The stairwells were empty. She logged the complaints and noted the camera review results. She expanded her monitoring to cover the lobby cameras, elevator cameras, and hallway cameras for the reported floors. She watched carefully for several weeks. She never caught the figure on any camera, but she started getting something else instead. In the hallway camera footage on the 4th floor, the one that covered the corridor between the elevator bank and the far stairwell, she started noticing a recurring detail. Between 2 and 3 a.m., several times a week, the elderly woman in Unit 4C would open her door and place something in the hallway just outside her door, a bowl or a small plate. Then she would go back inside. This happened consistently for about 3 weeks before Lucia decided to check on it. She did not want to alarm the resident. She was an older woman, had been in the building for over a decade, but leaving items in the hallway was a fire code issue at a certain point, and more importantly, Lucia was curious. She spoke with the woman during her day shift overlap, caught her at the mailboxes. The woman, her name was Elspeth, mid-80s, sharp eyes, polite but reserved, explained that she left food out for the man who visited. She said he came by most nights and she did not want him to go hungry. Lucia asked her to describe the man. Elspeth described him the same way the other residents had: tall, older, very still, dark clothing. She added one detail the others had not mentioned. She said he never spoke, but he always nodded at her when she opened the door, like he was grateful. Lucia asked Elspeth when she had first seen him. Elspeth thought about it for a moment and said she believed it was about 6 months ago. She said she had not thought to report it because he seemed harmless, and honestly, she said, she appreciated the company. That night, Lucia watched the 4th floor hallway camera with focused attention. At 2:22 a.m., Elspeth's door opened. The elderly woman placed a small plate of food on the floor outside her door, looked down the hallway, seemed to nod at something, and went back inside. She pulled the door mostly closed, but left it slightly open. Lucia watched the hallway. The plate sat there. The hallway was empty. At 2:31 a.m., the food on the plate was gone. Lucia rewound the footage and watched again. She watched it 4 times. The food was there, and then it was not. No one came down the hallway. No one approached the plate. Nothing moved in the camera frame between 2:22 and 2:31. But on the 5th time she watched it, she noticed something she had missed. At the very edge of the frame, right at the border of where the camera's field of vision ended, near the mouth of the stairwell, there was a mirror, a decorative mirror that one of the hallway residents had put up on the wall years ago. It was partially in frame. Lucia had never paid attention to it before. In the mirror, during those 9 minutes, there was a reflection. A tall figure standing near Elspeth's door, looking down at the plate. Lucia zoomed in as much as the footage would allow. The figure was there, completely clear in the mirror, visible from the torso up, standing right next to the door. There was no figure in the actual hallway, only in the reflection. She watched the footage from every previous night she had saved. Every night that Elspeth left food, the mirror told the same story. A figure in the reflection, nothing in the hall. Lucia notified building management the next morning and recommended a welfare check on Elspeth, who was found to be completely fine and was gently encouraged to stop leaving food in the hallway. Elspeth agreed without argument, but when the building manager explained that security had never found any evidence of someone in the building, Elspeth just smiled and said, "Well, some people don't leave evidence." The complaints about the figure in the stairwells stopped after that. Lucia kept the saved camera footage on a personal drive. She has never fully decided what she believes, but she does know this. On the night she pulled those mirror recordings, she went to the fourth-floor hallway herself and stood in front of that mirror. The mirror showed the empty corridor behind her. Her own reflection looked back at her. And just at the edge of her reflection, barely visible in the far corner of the mirror's surface, something was standing. She turned around immediately. The hallway was empty. She has never looked in that mirror again. And that is where we will leave it tonight. 9 stories from people who showed up for work one night and came home changed. Most of them moved on, took other jobs, tried to put distance between themselves and whatever it was they encountered. Some of them managed it better than others. But the thing about a story like this is that it doesn't really end, not for the person who lived it. Not for the guard who still checks his rearview mirror in the parking lot. Not for the woman who will not look in mirrors at work anymore. Not for any of them. The next time you're in an empty building at night, or even a building you think is empty, pay attention to the mirrors. Pay attention to the places just outside your field of vision. Pay attention to the sounds that don't quite have a source. Some things don't leave evidence, but they are there. Thanks for watching. If you have your own story, drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.